Hi everyone. Okay, our tutorial number 4. Today, we're going to deal with bar plots or bar charts, which I think many others of you in class may have realized today is actually possibly the most irritating of the chart options to deal with in R. The function barplot, which is what we'll be using, barplot, can be very finicky about what format the data comes in. So I wanted to show you what my recommendation is for how you deal with bar plots, at least in the context of our class. There are better ways of doing this, but I just want to show you a simple approach that can, I think, alleviate some frustration. And that approach is to simply enter the data into R yourself instead of importing it from Excel. Because when you import it from Excel, the way that R is reading the data makes it hard for you to then translate that data into a bar plot. Okay, so I'll just show you how I did this, and some of you saw me do this in class. Okay, so we're going to do this with the data nugget, how the cricket lost its song. But there's at least one or two other data nuggets that are very, very similar. And so you'll recognize the format, for those of you that had this data set or a similar data set, you'll recognize this format of basically a 2x2 table. So you can see we have the number of males that have a particular mutation, the number of males that do not have a particular mutation and the number of males that do have that mutation. And then the number of those males with or without this mutation that are parasitized or not parasitized. Okay, so we essentially want to see, does this mutation make a difference as to whether, in terms of parasite resistance? Okay, so I'm going to open up R. And here I've just given a new script a title. It's bar charts, and it's based upon data nugget, how the cricket lost its song. Okay, so first, we are going to make our data set. I'm going to call it crickets. So that's the name that I'm going to tell R that this data set has. So that's how I will refer to it with R. Then I'm going to make a matrix. Okay, so this is basically, I'm going to recreate this matrix in R. Okay, so first I'm going to tell R what numbers I want to go into the matrix. So I'm going to do 25, 42, 25, 42, 1, 121. Okay. The order that you enter them does matter. I never remember what the order is, so I usually play around with it until I get a matrix that looks like what I want. In this case, we only have 4 numbers, so that's pretty easy. So now I'm going to tell the matrix function that I want my matrix to have 4 data points arrayed into 2 rows, so n rows for number of rows equals 2, and 2 columns, n number of columns, n col equals 2. Let's run that, and then let's see what our data looks like. Oops. That didn't work. That's from a former thing, so it's crickets. Okay, so what you can see is if we compare this matrix here to the matrix I want to recreate, it looks like my numbers are where I want them to be. 25, 1, 42, 121. Okay, the only problem is we've lost a lot of information, right? We don't know what our columns are. We don't know what our rows are. So first, I'm going to use the function col names of crickets equal. So I'm saying the column names of crickets are going to be equal to, and essentially we want before mutation and after mutation. Okay, so these go into quotation marks. That's important, and recall that this C with the parentheses is what we essentially use whenever we want to put 2 terms together or multiple terms together. We want to make a vector. run that, and let's see what happens to our crickets data set. Okay, now we have column names. We're going to do the same thing for the row names. And in this case, crickets equal to, we want parasitized and not parasitized. Okay, I'm going to go with parasitized and healthy. Okay, so we've recreated our original data set, or our original matrix that we have in this data nugget. Perfect. Now, that made my life really easy because this is set up exactly how barplot likes to read things. Right? It's just a nice little matrix with no data other than just the data that I wanted to plot. Okay. So this is the default way in which barplot plots things. It's this stacked bar chart. I don't know why that's the default for barplot because it's impossible to read. I advise against these kinds of stacked bar charts. The way that we move away from this stacked bar chart and go to move away from the default is simply by typing beside equals true. Okay, so what that means is I'm telling it instead of stacking the bars, I want you to put them next to one another. Okay, so now we have our nice stacked bars, and we can know just by looking at our matrix versus our graph, we have our parasitized here in dark gray and our non-parasitized here in light gray. Okay. A couple modifications we want to make. We want to have a name for our y-axis. And so that's number of crickets. That's pretty small. So we'll change the size of that to 2. We'll also change the size of the axis values to 1.5. Notice that our x-axis values didn't change. That's because in bar chart, these are considered names. They're the names of the bars. And so we'll write cx.names and change that size as well. Okay. I also want to change the limits of the y-axis because notice that we're actually exceeding the limit. So I'll go from 0 to 140. Okay. An additional thing I want to do is change my colors. So we're going to do red for parasitized and blue for healthy. Okay. Unfortunately, I may have just changed the colors, but we still have a really hard time it's still really hard for someone who just walked in and looked at this graph. They wouldn't be able to tell what's what. So we need to add a legend. Okay. So for that, we use the legend function. First, we type the x and y coordinates for where we want the legend. So I'm going to put it at x-axis, or x value 1, and that's actually right here. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll put it at 1. We'll put it at 140, so we want it at the top of the graph. It's going to read parasitized, healthy. So let's just see what that looks like. Okay, so we've got our names, but we don't have any actual identifying information. So let's also add some fill colors. For some reason with legend, this value is fill. So we'll have red, blue, Okay, that's better. I think that's a bit small, so we'll change the size. That's much better. And last but not least, my graph is falling off of my graphing window, as you can see here. So I'm going to change the margins as we did in one of our earlier graphs. That puts some space around my graph. And there we go. Okay. That's one approach to plotting a bar chart. So then we're going to save this script in my RTutorial file as crickets so I can call it up next time. Okay. If you're planning on doing bar charts, this is one approach that you can follow if you'd like. Alternately, I'm happy to talk with you about other approaches you can take.